What's up, everybody? Just wanted to talk Pint X repairs because I got one here and it's another one, and I'll just be opening it for the first time. And I thought it'd be good for everyone to see what it looks like starting from scratch. I know there's other videos on the subject. I have videos on the subject. I have videos I haven't released on the subject. But here is a good subject, which is the Pint X battery repair. And instead of this one sort of starting from the everything already taken apart, I can actually then take this one apart on camera and show the results. So the first thing that happened when this guy dropped his board off was that I insisted that he get the Badger job done on this. It's not something I necessarily recommend to everybody, but if your board comes in with this amount of mud and you've denied riding in water, I begin to question your ability to discern between what is water and what is not. So since we're here and we're on the subject, I'm just gonna lay it out for you. Rain is wet. That's true. But there's a lot of other things that are wet, like puddles. Puddles you want to consider sort of just to be concentrated rain. And I think that part is forgotten. It is the exact same thing with mud. Mud is really just wet dirt. And a lot of times mud can be good, a lot of times mud can be bad. Mud is great. I love mud. Played in the mud since I was a little kid. The problem is that when you have something that runs on batteries and electricity, water usually doesn't like that. And that couldn't be more true, but in the case of the one wheel, where they can work soaking wet. I've seen the controllers work completely soaking wet for some time, but when they start to malfunction, they really start to go after that. I suppose the other thing that I see is when the mud gets caked on to the seals of the board, a lot of times that water doesn't have anywhere to go, and you kind of hope that it dries. But what happens is water gets everywhere, and you can see here on his bolt heads that there's dirt residue and dried dirt residue, for the lack of a better term here. Which means that his elements have a chance of getting wet. I would say especially in the areas where the one wheel is known to have issues. And that's right by the motor connectors and by each one of the cable glands. You can see I don't like wrestling with the way that these pieces of plastic fit in with the metal portions of the board. So I opt to completely remove the bumpers before I start messing with it. And that's simply so that I have room to unplug everything. And I don't even have the largest hands in the world. It is just way easier for me to get a set of pliers or my fingers in here if my board is missing a rail. And I understand how they put this thing together so that you can just take those little cable clips out and try to drop the wheel onto the bottom. But then the problem comes with the way this plug was designed, and getting that thing to plug back in properly without bending your pins can be a challenge. And I don't need anything at this shop that could possibly break someone's board, especially since I'm the one slated to fix them. So drop the motor out entirely, and then I can get into this battery box. And for the most part, now that the wheel is completely off and I'm missing a rail, in my opinion, I am doing a much better job at protecting the valuable insides like the harness and stuff like that, because those are the parts that break a lot, and it can happen from continued abuse of the harness itself. So the last thing I want to do is leave the motor on here and try to rip this box from underneath, which is how I've seen a lot of install videos go, and I don't like those install videos. Not because I would say 70% of people have a decent time with them, but then that 30% that don't really have a problem. And a lot of it stems from how violent the action is to get these things apart in those videos. So what you want to do is do yourself a favor, do your board a favor, and try not to stress the whole system out like that. You can see even here, that's about the most kink that I'm going to want in that harness. The wires for the Pint harness are small, skinny, and they can break easily. So even when shipping, I really am hesitant to tell people to put it into a small box and send it my way. I would much rather have them leave one whole rail on and leave their boxes on that rail, and then send it like that so that we're not doing any additional damage to the harness itself, which is not meant to be bent in all sorts of weird directions. All right, so the lid's gonna come off. You can see this seal is still here, so this is the first time this board is being opened since it came from the assembly factory, where we know there is some issues, not with the factory, but with the total way that this thing is designed. So let me give you a little tour of what we see from the top here. Over here on the lead side, you can see that on this one, both those cables were routed up the side pretty well. What can happen is these leads weren't always run up the side of that battery box very well, and the negative lead would actually be hanging over. Hang on, I'm gonna open this up and show you. But the negative lead itself would sort of be not bent over like that. It would actually be just run straight over the edge of that, and over time it would come loose. It wouldn't just come loose here at the XT60. It would actually pull the negative lead right off the battery because of the way that it was stuffed down in there. Now we're gonna get a good look at crimped ass wires. All right. And you know, the way that it goes, the way that you can see this happening is they're right over the temperature sensors for the most part here, right? And you're catching a couple of the leads that you can see that are yellow and green there, but just either way, not a great situation. And when you look at the inside of the way that this box was designed, you can start to see why this is happening. They made it so that this balance lead comes out of the bottom of the pack. Now, again, I sort of understand why you're going to put the balance lead out of the bottom of the pack. That is where the space is for the battery. But the other thing that you got to remember is these two batteries are identical. They have the exact same cells in them. And in fact, what we're seeing in some of these Pint X packs is we are seeing Pink 30Q cells. We know that those cells didn't do well in XRs. We knew that in 2018. And then we knew that again in 2021 when we found the same cells inside of 4212s that were dying early. So for me to believe that this company doesn't understand that these cells don't work in their pack just seems really crazy to me. Now, this pack right here, it probably has regular VTC6 cells in them, okay, like this. They're green, they're great, they've got a great discharge, they've got a great life history. They work really well inside of one wheels in the 15S2P configuration. It is, again, crazy to me that they fit this pack, which, you know, was pretty robust. A lot of people are riding 5,000, 10,000 miles on these XR packs into this. I mean, this is like a quarter smaller than the other one is. And because they tried to squish it all down and make it fit in the Pint X box, that is why we have this. So really, what are the difference between the XR and the Pint X? It's firmware. It is how accessible the inside of the system is to us. Almost no one's working on it because the Pint X seems to have the same kind of encryption configuration that the GT has. And so really what we did is we went from a great platform on the XR to a much smaller platform on the Pint X with the exact same battery pack squished down into a smaller form, when the larger form itself did a pretty decent job, and then this does not. And it's because they tried to get this pack into the pint form. And my guess that would be ease of manufacturing for Future Motion itself, since these boxes for the Pint and the Pint X look exactly the same. They just deepen the dish. And then I don't think that they figured that those balance leads were going to rub over that, because, well, there's this gap in there, right? You can see where the, oops, sorry, it's on this side. You can see where the gap is right there in the wall. But then the problem was that they made the dish so deep and the battery leads come out of such a small area that even by removing this wall, you still have some rub. And that is why I recommend that everybody that's going to do this repair not use electrical tape. Electrical tape, cap tape, all that stuff is great, but because again, where that lead is in that battery box and it's allowed to rub against it, the best recommendation I have is to add 2 pieces of foam, little tiny pieces of single-sided adhesive foam. One side is going to go on your Pint X battery itself, and then the other part of it is going to go on the battery box when you're done dremeling that out. So the first thing I can do is take this piece of foam and get that right on those leads. Because in the end of the day, if I put electrical tape here, or if I put electrical tape on top of the like sharp little jagged edges of plastic that happen after you get done dremeling it out, these wires can absolutely still rub on that battery box, but only because of, you know, physically the way that it all fits together. And if I didn't have a deep background in sort of physical rehab and optimization, I probably wouldn't care as much how things fit together and what happens to things over time. But since that was kind of my job before with the human body, I've made it sort of my job here also with the one wheel. And because I have that kind of foresight into how things will wind up, not now, but how they will in the future, that is why you will see that I was one of the first people, if not the first person, to contact Future Motion about what I saw as a major issue in terms of how they put everything together. I'm also a little bit upset with them because when I first wrote them last year, they told me that the damage that they saw could have been my fault, and that the best thing to do was to keep sending those boards back into Future Motion. But I didn't see that as actually being a really good solution, and it didn't happen. So now that I'm onto the Pint X modification here, you can see I'm using a pair of pliers to get at that first layer of wall, because you don't need to be dremeling everything inside of that box. In fact, sometimes dremeling it down can add more of those burrs that I was talking about that can actually damage your battery pack. So I take some pliers and I take some snips and I clear out as much of this material as I can with those two things, so that when I get the Dremel in there, really the biggest thing that I'm doing with it is I'm trying to sort of just smooth out and down some of these edges. But again, because that battery harness comes out of the bottom and that wall is always going to cover that bottom, we want a foam on foam. So if you've gone to your local shop to get this problem mitigated, make sure that they have added foam to your situation, or otherwise your situation could wind up being the exact same, and I'm sure that's got to be pretty frustrating. Using a little grinder wheel, not a big deal. Great. And that's seriously more than enough. If you've pulled everything out the right way, and you've insured and you got the foam, that's really what you care about. So now that that foam is down, I'm gonna go ahead and put this foam over. You see, it's just a tiny little like inch and a half section, and it can fit right on that little ramp. You can see there where I did the dremeling, and I'm going to cover that area with that foam tape. Because when I go and put everything back together now, what's gonna be nice for me and nice for this board and nicer to the rider in the future is ensuring the only friction that happens inside of this box, if it happens, or when it happens, however way you want to look at it, absolutely and 100% happens from foam rubbing on foam, which means padding on padding. Otherwise, what you've got is the balance leads, the hard tray, and a piece of electrical tape. And I know that we've all seen electrical tape before, so it's great, but it's not going to stop those things from wearing down. It's not going to prevent any damage from your harness. It is more going to protect the actual case underneath. So now that I've got the foam on there, you can see when I go to press everything in, it's got a nice little cushion in the corner. And that's what we want. We want the cushion coming from the tray up so that the battery lead can press against that foam. And we want the foam against the battery leads so that way it'll press up against the foam. And any movement will be the foam on foam, and it won't be plastic on wires. It won't be plastic on tape. I'm sorry, it won't be wires on tape. It'll be foam on foam. We want foam on foam action here for sure. Gonna grab the BMS. And installing everything back the right way. I usually do my balance leads first. So I'm gonna do the XC60 to the board. I'm gonna do the info wires, and I'm gonna do the charge port. And then of course we need to, in order, go battery main, and finally battery leads. We can chuck this all together here. Good. Then we're gonna get the lid back down on her. We're gonna get the screws back in the lid. And that's it. It is a pretty quick job to do. If you don't feel comfortable with any part of this, or you don't feel like you're mechanically inclined, then 100% go and find a shop that will do it for you. Because the other thing that happens here, and you can kind of see it, is that the O-ring, or the gasket, on the Pint X is slightly too big. I think they boil these or they do something to reduce the size in total before they install them. So that makes reinstalling them difficult. What you also want to make sure that you're doing after you get all this stuff installed is putting a little dollop of silicone here. And that's simply because you've created a break in your O-ring. So that way, if you're riding through any wet stuff and that could have been a problem, you have again mitigated every single issue. Not just the ones that you see in front of your face, but while you got the board open, absolutely going for it. And then the last thing that I want to talk about today is the idea of planned obsolescence and exactly what that is in terms of technology. And the three major points for technology for planned obsolescence are non-removable batteries. And although One Wheel skirts away with having removable batteries, we all know what their policy is. So while they made a removable battery, it's technically not a removable battery because you're not allowed to service it yourself. And that is the second part of planned obsolescence that should be discussed, which is exactly that. Manufacturer makes repairs difficult, purposely encrypts software, like all of these things under the guise of course, their intellectual property, right? Because God knows that Future Motion came up with all of these ideas themselves for the one-wheel skateboard. So they wouldn't want anyone stealing the idea they stole. And it wasn't really stealing an idea, it was taking an idea and it was making it scalable. So it's not so much like intellectual theft so much as it's like production theft, because I doubt any of the guys that were riding their one-wheel mopeds on the beach prior to 2014 did not have a plan on how to scale that manufacturing up. But this company definitely did, and I believe that also had to do with Kyle's experience in the e-bike space where, you know, if you look up his name, he has had quite a few contributions positively to the e-bike world. And that is probably where and how he started all of this. And that's it. So literally, I have just mitigated this Pint X's damage, and it's taken me a total of about 20 minutes. It's a quick job. I guess I'd probably take for granted that I've done a few dozen of these things, so I'd probably go through it a little bit quicker than other people will. Slow down, take your time, pause the video where you need to, and make sure you understand what you're doing. If you have questions, the internet is a plethora of information, if not sometimes too much. And then we can start putting this all back together, and this fella is gonna be okay. Come and pick up his board or his son's board, or I'm not really sure whose board this is, but if it's his board, great. He'll get to ride it. If it's his son's, great, he'll get to ride it. Either way, we have a happy rider here. He doesn't have to worry quite so much about damage later. The big thing that, again, I tell everybody is the breaks are gonna happen in the spots where you haven't predicted those breaks are gonna be. And with these boards, that can be insanely frustrating. The last thing I wanna do is wonder why my board is broken. And unfortunately, when you leave everything open and wide out in the open for rain and other stuff to get in there, you are increasing the amount of variables and environmental factors that can break your board. And since I see a dozen to 2 dozen boards in and out of this shop every week and deal with their owners and listen to everything that's happening with them, I can tell you right now that, one, if your board does break, don't put the self-value of your own life into how your board operates or not. Electronics break all the time. When I've had my iPhone break on me before. I don't try to devalue my own worth to this life just because my board broke down. It's sure the end of my fun for a little while, but it's not the end of my life. Foot pad goes back on. And actually, on the Pint X, you can pretty reasonably put both pads back on. You can even put the bumper back on if you want to at this point. Everything from here on out becomes more of a personal assembly preference order. I've done a lot of different orders in the shop over the years and devices, and this is just what I've come up with that works for me specifically. And then I really don't like the way that these slide on. I know that they're pretty neat, probably for someone who doesn't go off-roading or rides in the mud, because you're not supposed to ride in the mud. But personally, I don't like them. I don't like the way they go back together. I don't like the way they come apart. I don't like all these kind of like interlocking parts. Again, it's neat, it's nifty. Doesn't help me out none. So I will go through and pre-place most of these bolts where they're supposed to go. It's just so I can have an ease of the see, so mud and dirt and debris affect the way that your board goes back together. The bottom all done. Just got to put the fender back on here and cinch those bolts down as well. And that's it. Start to finish, 30-minute job. Pretty good. Get the Dremel off the inside of a board. Make sure that thing works. And make sure if there is an issue in the future that it has absolutely nothing to do with the battery lead connectors.